Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to AWS Security Live. My name is Rob Hale. I'm one of your co-hosts. Security Live is a bi-weekly show. We broadcast out on several channels and we talk about security challenges with our customers and with our partners. As ever, I am joined by an amazing co-host. Brian, introduce yourself.
Wow, amazing, Rob. I'll take that descriptor this morning. My name is Brian Mendenhall. I lead the worldwide security and identity partner specialist team at AWS. The longest title, I think, in the business. Every year I get one more. So it's what we got, like one more month, and I'll have another word in my title. I'm looking forward to it.
I think we need some more acronyms in there, and then I can we can use the acronym swear jar. Which actually, that's an interesting. We need to talk about the acronym swear jar. So we're all about uh, democratizing security, and we use an awful lot of acronyms, right? So when we talk about an acronym or mention an acronym, we'll try and explain that. If we don't, do put a comment in the comment section. If you're on YouTube and Twitch, you can leave a comment. Let us know. Call us out if we don't explain something, and we can explain exactly what we're talking about. So we've got an amazing couple of guests on for our shows today. So first of all, we have the amazing Ash Hunt from Cyera. Um, uh, Ash, please come on and introduce yourself.
Hi guys, good to be with you. I think I'm
Hey,
going
Ash,
to take
welcome.
the amazing descriptor as well and just save that for future. So yeah, Ash, I'm the VP of Strategy for Cyera. So we are, the world's leading data and AI security company. But prior to there, I spent most of my career as a former FTSE 250 CISO in financial services and banking many times over. So have lived this problem in and out. And yeah, so I think it's great to be with AWS as a key partner of Cyera. As a data security and AI security platform, it's been really pivotal having this partnership. Fundamentally, our technology, the data intelligence, discovery, and classification that we provide, gets across data throughout the AWS environment, whether that's storage in S3, RDS, Redshift, and right through to AI services like SageMaker, Bedrock, Amazon Q, etc. And then you can build from that data intelligence right onto that identity graph piece, understanding all of the identities, whether those are human, machine, agent, that can access the data wherever it lives. And I think tackling that layer is really what we're game changing through delivering risk reduction, but not at the sacrifice of opportunity creation. And I think that's an interesting direction for security writ large.
Amazing, amazing. And so you mentioned you this is your first kind of technology role, but you've been in as a CISO in the banking world. How did you get into security? I think it's always something that lots of people want to find out, and it's never a straight path, right?
Yeah, well, mine's wonky in the extreme. I started off playing jazz professionally when I was young, and for whatever reason, had to take a pretty violent U-turn in my career, and I was pretty much self-taught. So I self-published a paper when I was, I think, about 18, and
Wow.
arrogantly sent it to every government and university I could get hold of around the world, and it got picked up by the UN. And so my first job was going out there representing the UK on cyber policy, and then I moved into British government, so worked advising secretaries of state and central government on nation-state cybersecurity policy. And then I moved into the research side. So I ran threat intelligence and quantitative risk teams for the Information Security Forum. Then moved into the first foray in banking. So I actually used to work for State Street. Got to work on lots of interesting projects, everything from behavior change to building their first threat landscape, their first continuous controls monitoring program. And so I spent probably the second half of my career doing a lot of data modeling, risk modeling, which was kind of a good backdrop because I got a lot into decision engineering and data
Yeah.
analytics. And then so when I took on my first CISO role, and I've done a few of them, that became a really core tenet of the kind of practice that we were delivering, not only within security, but across the organization to become data-centric and build data-centric architectures across the enterprise technology environment. And that's really kind of what spurred my interest. And, that's part of the reason that I joined Cyera to help lead their strategy.
That's
Super
awesome. And
interesting.
Before Brian asks a security-related question, because I know he's got one, if you're watching us, you're watching us live, please do ask any questions, put any comments. We will attempt to read them out, and we actually have a non-related security one, so I'll get that one out of the way. So, do you have any jazz recommendations, and what's your favorite jazz musician?
Well, so I've played piano since I was about 5, but I actually did most of my professional playing with the trumpet. So I was very into sort of West Coast 50s cool jazz, so Chet Baker, Miles Davis. But I would say if you pretty much want to like listen to the best, especially if you're in New York and in the US, you've got places like Birdland, Village Vanguard. In the UK, Ronnie Scott's is a great club that I've played at, and it's a fantastic venue for the sort of latest and greatest musicians. But yeah, pretty much anything that was like 50s, 60s Miles Davis is my sort of go-to.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I've given Brian a moment
That's
to think of that
amazing.
question now.
No, like as you can see, Ash,
Yeah.
I respect like a fellow musician, and Rob, I appreciate you we bringing that question forward. I'm happy to actually spend the next, what do we have, like 24 minutes just talking about music, and we can completely flip this. Our producers will freak out. It'll be great. Let's keep that in the back burner. I like that.
Jazz and cybersecurity combined. I love it.
Absolutely, and it's this is going to be so cheesy, but in so many ways, security is like jazz, right? There's a lot of improvisation, and then there's also like some frameworks and structures that you want to follow. But at the same time, sometimes you got to like feel how things come and how things go, right?
So if you look at a lot of like music prodigies, I was not one of them, but if you look at them broadly, they're very good at maths, they're very good at engineering type disciplines. And I can't remember, I think it wasn't Equifax, but there was a major US corporation that I think hired their CISO, which was their first one with a music degree. I think he was a professional cellist. So there is a cross link, and I would say, having done multiple CISO roles in public and private organizations, you have to get pretty creative even when you're working within a consistent framework. So there are similarities. That's
super interesting. All right, so now I'm ready for the security questions. Ash, are we good? I feel like I've got one that I feel it's a good starter. So, like in your experience going from the CISO role and like the history that you've seen, the CISO's handbook, step 1 is like, what do you have and where is it, right? It's really about like inventorying your security controls and your data and everything that's out there. In your time, like going from CISO into the position that you're at now, how have you seen the inventorying of what you have, where it's at, what's protecting it, and the governance and the compliance and everything around that? How have you seen that kind of like discovery and identification process change through time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because sometimes, I still to this day wake up and think, have we failed in large chunks of the practice that we've been deploying for the last, well, at least over my entire career, so well over a decade. And I think sometimes we have, right? Like I would go to conferences, I would read research 10 years ago that was talking about these same issues. And even when I was a CISO, issues like data governance and identity governance were what I would call sort of orphan security programs. We spent a lot of money on them, a lot of resource, and probably didn't really get that far, and therefore begin abandoning them. And I think a couple of years ago, particularly the advancement of LLMs, we did see a fundamental, a tectonic shift in the technology. I think it's funny in the AI discussion, it gets likened to, at least in the security arena, to a kind of, that we go through these tropes, right? We have, innovation on the network to more hybrid, device architectures. We have then, innovation in infrastructure to moving from on-prem to cloud, and that this is the same, but it's definitely not, right? There is a fundamental shift in the way that we are going to be designing controls going forward, and that innovation has completely galvanized innovation in those two programs that previously we were casting aside. And Cyera, obviously, at root was tackling the kind of data side of that component, and now into identity. And the reality is, when you have very constrained environments, you can, to a degree, manually go after inventorying assets. But every CISO I know in all of the entirety of my career has never had a complete CMDB. They have ended up with multiple incomplete repos, and the estate is metastasizing at a rapid scale and pace. In addition to that, so when you couple all those problems together, your idea of having a completely sort of high integrity, 100% living inventory is just on the hinterland for most organizations. Now, you kind of have to fight fire with fire. So because data is exponentially growing, and it seems in many cases the assets in our estate are at least outpacing in growth our ability to get hold of them, chucking that kind of AI at that problem that's driving it, i.e. data, is then part of that solution. And so being able to deploy machine learning and LLMs at scale, we're able to get across very complex data estates in rapid timeframes. And for me, it's probably the most important foundational capability the CISO is going to need going forward. But it is the really exciting thing, I think, is it's the starting point. There are 100,000 use cases on top that are now going to completely change because of our understanding of data. And as someone who's definitely been involved in data analytics and decision engineering for a long time, there is so much opportunity to recraft the fundamental design structures and principles of our security programs. So I think we're going to get much more deeper into true context engineering across the enterprise, systems-based thinking, where we really understand how the business operates end to end, rather than having lots of siloed security programs that are focusing on the capability rather than the outcome. And that's really what the innovations in data intelligence are beginning to give us.
That's an interesting kind of line of inquiry. So I to show my age now, 28 years in security, but I can remember doing data classification and CMDB, so configuration management database work for banks. And it started out as we need to know what all our assets are, who owns them, etc., what the vulnerabilities are, and then you get the huge stack of CVEs. And I have completely forgotten what CVE stands for, but your vulnerability report, common vulnerability, something or other. So you've got that, and then you've got to try and prioritize that and do something with it. But we never really worked from anything around data was normally around structured data. How do we protect our data in databases, etc.? Unstructured data was not controlled the same way. And I could reference back a number of different programs within large organizations where they initiated huge data classification projects that just failed because they didn't have the scale and there wasn't the intelligence there or scaling mechanisms from AI to help them do that, or machine learning. It was almost down to the human to classify everything that they have. And if you can imagine that now, could you classify manually everything that you've produced? No, probably not. But that's what we have in a cloud environment. We have a hugely expanding infrastructure which can shrink and expand at will, and we have data everywhere. And so it's really super important that we know where our data is and also who has access to it and what their behavior is as well. Do we have people who have access to data that maybe shouldn't have anymore?
Behavior is an interesting point. And like you, I share the battle scars. I've just got lots of moisturizer. That's just why I slightly look a bit younger. But I remember in my early parts of my career, especially working in sort of Fortune 100 banking, that we would have things like Titus, Bolden, James, and self-classification mechanisms, which really ended up being a way for end user to circumvent DLP controls that we were desperately trying to put in place. Exactly. And so, and actually, it's one of the reasons I actually dislike the term classification, because I think it does a huge disservice to what capability is now delivering for industry. And a lot of what we focus on at Cyera is data intelligence, because it's not just about single binary classifiers, it's the heuristic intelligence you get around every piece of data. And like I said, that is going to be the fuel for context engineering. And when I talk about that concept, it's exactly to your point, Rob, right? Like it's being able to understand the behavior activity that identities of all variants are executing with data assets across the business. And it's funny, the simplest questions are the hardest to answer. And that's probably not only true in technology, but in other fields. But in our field, is if you can really get to grip, I think, with the identity space and the data space, I do think you've got a large amount of your problem solved for. I've done a lot of work with insurers as well. And if you look at claims data sets and actuarial modeling in cyber, the root cause, the vast majority of the time, is abused credentials, compromised accounts as the initial vector of entry. And so when they're when your insurers are recommending, controls to reduce your policy costs, well, a lot of the time it's around identity controls. And so I think if you understand the data, if you understand the identities, then that is really going to be the foundation for the future security programs.
That's super interesting, Ash. I like how you connect the like what we traditionally call like data security posture management, DSPM or DLP, data loss prevention, and these concepts that we kind of put in a bucket over within infrastructure security, but we're talking about the fact that it's really inseparable from identity security as well, right? The concept that these two things are interwoven to a degree that they are inseparable, and then on top of that, Ash, how do we layer in and how do we know when to layer in other security controls? Like this data should be encrypted. This data is okay being unencrypted. We need firewalls here. We need these access controls there. How do we know which security controls to put in addition to the identity security around that?
So I think the realization came to me, and I can remember the exact day it happened. I was in a particularly challenging, I think it was a SOC 1 audit with one of the big four.
Nice.
And yeah, really enjoyable. And this is in a FTSE 250 organization that I was CISO of. And we're running through all of the controls. And I remember they came to Salesforce, I think it was at the time. And I remember turning around to them being like, well, look, the only sets of controls that we have influence over are the data that goes into it and the identities that access it. It's a third-party SaaS application. Mm-hmm. I said, I can give you their SOC 1 report, but I can't be responsible for how often they patch, what they patch, how they build the back end, all of the other pieces that wrap around that application. And it dawned on me as a kind of light bulb moment that effectively now, over time, we've ceded our control of our assets really to the degree that the only two things we're left handling are identities and access and data. And so that's kind of where my focus began to be on investing in resources to tackle that problem. I think then as we move forward, now that we are able to understand data in a completely different way than we were before, it's almost a necessary foundational step, and it's like you're building like puzzle pieces to understand a complete picture. And like you said, we start with the data layer, we move to the identity layer, and those two are those kind of core foundational pieces to, like I said, context engineering. So you mentioned like how would we know where to employ and deploy other controls? And as an ex-quant, there's, or at least on the practitioner side, there's a lot of ROI modeling that goes into that, because we also don't want to over-control process where it doesn't need to be. So encryption is a great example of that, right? You would not go and encrypt the entire estate. You should be very piecemeal about it around where your greatest loss exposure is going to be. And I think most of that is understanding business logic and workflow. We used to do a lot of these exercises in resiliency all the time about our MCPs, our mission critical processes. And I can tell you now, even in the biggest organizations in the world, they don't have a good grip on them, right? Because businesses are complex. And then now that every business is pretty much technology enabled end to end, you can imagine as the legacy debt over time is accrued, understanding all of the layers of technology underneath those business processes and all the stakeholders involved, it gets extremely difficult to know where that control architecture should be overlaid and where it shouldn't be. But all the answers in the data. And we couldn't read data very well. I think one of the most interesting things that I've seen in the evolution of what we've done with data intelligence is that it's not only transformed all the value add for the use cases when data is treated as an asset, i.e. reduction in storage costs, being able to remove redundant or duplicative data, reducing the loss exposure around critical sensitive data, etc. It's also been transforming the way other technologies in the stack read data and interpret data. So I know we mentioned data loss protection, DLP. That's another great example of the evolutionary work that we've done in Cyera to bring a form of cognition to DLP using data intelligence. So helping to orchestrate, almost like as a brain and nervous system, the rest of the signal intelligence, and to transform the improved understanding of those signals over time, so that the SOCs that I used to run aren't having to deal with false positives 97% of the time of their work. They're actually just focusing on the handful of things that they do. And the knock-on benefits from that: you have less attrition, people are happier in their jobs, they're learning the right skills, you have the right kind of development. And so, again, all of the answer is in the data. And it sounds obvious, but Rob said it at the start: we've not built data-centric security architectures historically. And I think we are now on the cusp of that, which I think is the foundational conversation needed for any secure AI enablement going forward.
So I remember SOC 1, which, if I remember right, SOC 1 is point in time. So SOC is, I'm going to remember this now. So system and operational control, organizational controls. And then SOC 2, I think, is over a period of time, 6 months or something like that. Is that correct?
Something like that.
So yeah. So how, these are things that obviously, if you're, and particularly if you're a listed company or you're regulated, those are reports that are super important to the business and not just for security. So how does being in the cloud and in the AWS cloud actually help around showing data security and access controls around your data?
So I think there are natural design principles in cloud infrastructure that lend itself to getting across those things quickly and easily, and particularly as unstructured data has become sort of a lot more common and a lot more of an issue for organizations. To your point, definitely a lot of the legacy technologies we were trying to deploy against data classification, data discovery, etc., would only deal with structured. It's now brought a whole new set of to the fore, and we've obviously adapted to meet that requirement. So being able to very straightforwardly just have read-only access, we're able to get across any environment that we need to, whether that's structured or unstructured data, whatever kind of repo across those environments. But, I should say as well, and I'm not being a contrarian, but we equally deploy that same approach, albeit with different architectural constraints, on-prem. And one of the most interesting things, because I've been on all sides of that fence, I've had on-prem environments pretty much cloud first, and then I've had lift and shifts, which is where I think probably 90% of the industry is. I'm seeing a growing trend of CISOs that I know in my network across the world actually moving back to on-prem because the lift and shifts that they've done weren't re-architecting applications for the cloud. They didn't get the cost savings, and they've moved back. And so I think one of the really interesting things working with organizations is how they're building out their private clouds and how they're being able to understand data in those kinds of environments, particularly the more listed companies and the heavily regulated ones. But the brilliant thing with cloud infrastructure, which is obviously where a lot of the core technologies are being sort of incubated, is the speed and the scale and the complexity that we're able to tackle. And that kind of trifecta is where we play best at, sitting right in the middle of that. We're able to focus on speed rather than haste, so that we keep the accuracy without having to sacrifice a slowdown of any enterprise initiatives. And at the same time, able to have the right design principles that can scale with the complexity of data, because it is changing and it is getting more complex. And we're even seeing things like ephemeral data states now for certain organizations. So you have to be able to adapt in real time. And I think one of the really interesting things that we've been delivering, particularly supported by our R&D center and across AWS environments, is a form of adaptive governance. And I think that kind of architecture is what's needed going forward. We're going to have to be able to govern adaptively in real time and have what I would call reflexive controls. So I think historically we've been deploying reflective controls, even in the best case scenarios, where we've done some form of assurance activity to understand how those controls perform. But as we move forward, and I mentioned that orchestration that we're able to deliver across those cloud environments with data intelligence, that orchestration is going to be able to help build controls that can understand signals from other enterprise technologies. I think Anthropic call it ambient signals is their terminology for it. And I think we're going to get to a state where the controls will be able to adapt in real time to changing states. That comes back right to my first point around the context engineering. So I think those kind of cloud native environments give us the best form of playground to really solve the most complex and challenging problems. And that's why it's such a great partnership between Cyera and AWS.
It's really interesting, and we see a lot of our customers talk about continuous compliance and the ability to do that in a cloud environment far more than other areas. But it also kind of highlights the fact that, look, it doesn't actually matter where your data is. You've got to have a consistent monitoring and security policy and tool set across all of your environments, because if you've got it in one area and don't have it in another, well, you have either a weak spot or a blind spot that you need to kind of get a handle on. So I think that's really important for everybody to realize when you move to a security role, is that your remit is across all of those different areas, but in some areas it's easier, and some areas have different challenges. So that's really interesting to know. I'm going to ask two questions now, and one's kind of a personal question, and one's kind of a kind of more professional question. So we've got a broad array of wonderful listeners, right from people who aren't inside that want to get in. We have students, we have practitioners, we have a number of CISOs actually, I know, listen to the show as well. What's your advice about if you're not yet in the security industry? What would be your advice about how you'd get in? What would be your kind of first steps in the current the modern world we're now in? If you were to redo your first steps in getting into the industry, how would you do it? What advice can you give?
So, and this, it's very on the spot because I'm having to think back. But I would say, and perhaps this is a bias from my own career path, but I would say dominate the sort of ancillary disciplines to cyber, right? So there are a lot of disciplines that make you very successful, I think, in technology and cyber that have nothing to do with understanding half of the controls in a SOC 2 framework, for example. I used to remember this, and this is not to decry anything within those certifications, but there was always a healthy debate around certifications in the industry over static knowledge, understanding, and getting those credentials versus lived experience. And I would say the things that have served me best have been business context, like commercial skill, understanding how businesses actually operate. Communication is probably the most important skill that I've done. Persuasive influence, stakeholder engagement, and management. No matter what you're doing, you're going to have to be working with people, at least for now until agentic runs wild. But and it's really important that you learn how to do so, when to do so, etc. And then what I think that, like I said, there are surrounding ancillary disciplines that we in cyber have, in my view, almost arrogantly ignored. So a great example is data engineering. I hired my first data scientist into my security organization in my last role, and it was probably the best decision that I ever made. It changed the way that we built things. It changed my understanding. It kept upskilling me on stuff that I was, not a fay with, and that I needed to build into and help my teams build into their programs. And so I would say really get across the surrounding knowledge space that wraps around cyber, because the actual core stuff to understand, the principles, these simplistic ideas that we spoke about, aren't that difficult to understand, right? Like security principles are somewhat ingrained and inherent in the way that we operate as human beings in the world. It's the other stuff to make the delivery happen that's the most important.
Amazing advice. Thank you so much for your time. If you're watching, you've heard Ash talk, and you really want to find out more about Cyera and data security and how that might impact AI and agentic, there is a QR code that side of the screen. That side of the screen. It's been amazing having you with us today, Ash. Thank you very much for your time, and for all of our audience, we'll be back very shortly.
Thanks ever so much.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here on Security Live, where we talked about all things cybersecurity, AWS with AWS security partners. My name is Brian Mendenhall. I am the worldwide leader for the security and identity partner specialist team at AWS, the longest title here at AWS. I am not alone. I am joined by my wonderful, most amazing, magnanimous co-host, Rob Hale. I don't know if you can beat that, man. That's quite the introduction.
Yeah, okay, I'll buy you that drink. Hi, everybody. If you don't know me, my name's Rob Hale. I lead AWS's security partner strategy across our ISVs, our consulting partners, and our managed security partners as well. So, awesome to be here, and always great to co-present with Brian, because you never quite know what he's going to say next. But I think I owe him a drink for that intro.
Perfect. Before we jump into this, we do have a couple of ground rules. We've got to lay a couple ground rules here, Rob. Number one is the acronym alert. So within this show at Security Live, we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And sometimes we throw out those TLAs or those three-letter acronyms.
Love acronyms.
I heard another one. It was like a meta acronym. There's a better name for this, but it's acronyms within an acronym. So like using... Yeah, so like AWS security partners could be ASP, but AWS itself is an acronym. So if you say an acronym, we're going to call it out, and then we're going to do our best to define it. And it's funny, Rob, sometimes we struggle to define well-known acronyms. Bear with us. And if you are watching the show, make sure that you drop those in chat, drop your questions in chat. And before we get started, make sure that you drop your location in chat. We would love to say hi from afar. Okay.
Yeah, we are an interactive show. We're live, so please do interact with us. Ask our guests some questions.
Speaking of guests, we are not alone, Rob. We are joined by Hari Nair from Cequence Security. Hari, are you there?
I am. I can hear you loud and clear. Good day and good evening to everybody around the world. And love the vibe, love the banter between the two of you.
That's awesome. What we're here for. This is relaxed. We're just chatting. All right,
Yep.
So Hari, you want to tell us a little bit about your role in Cequence Security?
Sure. By way of introductions, Hari Nair, product manager, almost by accident, spent around 25 years in the industry, worked on pretty much most waves of connect all the things, starting from devices back in the late 90s, first acronym alert, PKI, which stands for public key infrastructure, way more technical term to describe what are now known as machine identities. But my background started out in with as an engineer, saw the .com, the .bomb era, kind of moved towards product management, have built. My passion is really about building products and problem solving. So I've done this for different verticals, the government, the military, international, enterprises, mostly focused now on AI, API, and bot security here at Cequence. Cequence has been around for about, I'd say 10, maybe something years. We started out with, understanding the difference between API calls and bots. And that's really where we built our name in the industry, just kind of being able to differentiate between, that's a human user trying to connect to some retail organization, trying to buy something, versus that's a sophisticated bot, which, maybe about a year ago, I love using this anecdote just to kind of convey the scale and the sophistication of some of these attacks. We ran into an interesting scenario where an attacker cycled through about 300,000 IP addresses in a minute as they were trying to breach a retail organization, right? And so Cequence is all about protecting your APIs, protecting them against malicious usage, enforcing standards. And as we started talking to our customers, we're primarily focused on the Fortune 500. What we realized very quickly was that there was a big disconnect between the promise of AI and the reality of AI. On one side, you see, hundreds of millions of dollars in investment into Anthropic, into OpenAI, and all these different, AI relevant tools. And on the other hand, you've got all these projects that are waiting to take off, but they aren't. And as we got into it, a big part of that came down to be, well, how do I know that I can secure these interactions, right? I think it goes back to a little bit about the visibility that, we were talking about in the previous session in the segment. But knowing where your AIs or your AI agents are knowing where your LLMs are is part of the problem. But we, in spite of our security DNA, were pulled left, if I could use that acronym, almost to enabling applications. So typically security is thought of as an overlay, right? You've got your business use case, you're running as fast as you can, you're trying to recognize as much of the market, and then you say, oh shoot, I got to layer security over this. Here, even though we had that security DNA, we were being pulled in the direction of let's enable your applications for AI. But the customers that we've been speaking to have been proactive, have been progressive enough to think about this as this is not a paradigm where I can just overlay security, just given the possibilities of AI, right? So it's not just this is the trend of our generation. This is an inflection point. I think who's the gentleman at Google basically talked about this as a systemic event where this changes the way we think, we do things, we think about things. But there's a before and there's an after, right? So in that world, there's a lot of organizations that basically want to go forward with AI, but they're being very cautious about it, and they're basically saying like, how do we do this the right way from the beginning? So as opposed to say IoT, Internet of Things security, or machine identities, we really want to do this the right way. So that's where Cequence comes in, because what we do is we understand APIs, we understand API calls. Today, there's about 10 billion API calls that we are in the middle of on any given day. Every given day, we're in the middle of about 10 billion calls for some of the largest organizations in the world, right? And who better to understand AI interactions? Because at the end of the day, your AI agents are effectively leveraging API calls at the back end than somebody like us who's kind of in the trenches, who's built sophisticated solutions for protecting against most, enterprising, resourceful attackers out there. So sorry, a little bit of a long-winded, answer to your question, but hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of clarity into Cequence and myself.
That's
cool.
it.
I
You covered it
remember
all.
ages ago I was delving into PKI security, implementing HSMs and vaults. The term
Yeah.
M of N was which is minimum
Authentication
number
scheme.
of participants to share. For example, a secret. So you'd split for example, a key wrapping encryption key. You'd split that between owners, and then you transport that key, which might have been, created in a manual lab somewhere in a small room, probably in a bank, and they'd be using papers and slide rules to do that. And then you transport that to a site, and then flip forward now to the cloud, and we're not doing that anymore, but we have a huge amount of scale, and I think that's
for sure.
You mentioned that around API security, and when we move into the cloud, and more so into a world of AI and agentic AI, everything has an API, absolutely everything. So if you're not paying attention to your APIs and how they're behaving and how should they be behaving, that's something that is really presenting an opportunity for improvement, and obviously an opportunity for somebody to exploit.
For sure. And that's where the, really good distinctions there, Rob. There is a difference between me as a human being, me as a service, and me as an AI agent acting on behalf of one of these entities, right? So it's fairly straightforward for us to differentiate between a human being and a bot, right? And that's, again, we've gotten here over a couple of years of fine-tuning, leveraging machine learning, doing this at scale, etc. But an AI agent is not a human, it's not a bot. It kind of sits in that uncomfortable space between the two, where it can act on your behalf. It can do a whole ton of things, a lot of things much faster than a human being would. And so from that standpoint, it's an interesting nut to crack, because you want to enable that thing. You want to make that, that human being that initiated that request as productive as possible. In fact, as we look into enabling, agentic AI, there's two use cases that come to the forefront, right? So one is employee productivity, right? How do I get my employees to be more productive? I mean, me as a product manager, I use Jira, I use Confluence, I use Salesforce, I use Slack, and I'm able to do things maybe 5 to 10x faster than I would do if I didn't have these tools. So there is a certain necessity to getting people to go as fast as they can, but within the organization. That's internal to the organization. And then you've got the external use case where, yes, I want to enable agentic commerce. Think about a retail customer, right? So I want people to come in using Claude, using OpenAI, and basically being able to transact using those agents. And so that's the external use case, so to speak. And in both cases, right, the ability to distinguish between, yes, that's a legitimate use case versus, no, that's an agent going rogue, right, is so important. And so, yes, you need to understand your APIs. You need to understand what's out there. And at the pace of development today, new APIs are being, application programming interfaces for APIs. Thank you. But new APIs are getting introduced pretty much every minute or getting updated, multiple times a day. In that world, how do you essentially say, okay, here's the application that needs to expose new functionality and take it all the way to the agent on the other end of the equation that basically says, as new functionality becomes available, I should be able to use it, but if I'm allowed to, for this user, right? So yes, Rob as a user or Brian as a user can go ahead and access, all the emails in his Outlook inbox, if you would. But if it's an agent acting on behalf of Brian, you don't want that agent to go in and say, wipe out my entire inbox, right? Because that's not necessarily an interaction that a human being might want to do. There might be scenarios, but that's the tough nut to crack. How do you translate those API calls into AI calls? And where do you step in and say, okay, an agent is acting on your behalf, which is great, but an agent is doing things that you may not have intended to do, which is not so great. And so being able to enable that is a tough challenge.
Yeah, I was talking to a security leader at one of our customers, kind of a few weeks ago now, and they described, designing or creating policies around agents as treating them as digital toddlers, because they're doing human-like things, but like a toddler, you need some really, really, strict guardrails around them to make sure they don't do something
you need
that
the
you don't want them to
foam
do.
on the edge of the coffee table, and you need those plugs that go. Those are your security controls, right? Like you've got like guardrails, and you've got firewalls with the plugs that go in the outlets.
Yeah. So now if you take that analogy and you take that to, an agent that's performing, potentially thousands of tasks really, really quickly. Well, now you've got a toddler who's got a sugar rush, so too much sugar, too many sweets. And then you string together a load of those together to form, orchestrated agents. And now you have something that's really, really complex to understand. So how do you go about actually trying to understand that and securing that?
Yeah, you can't spank the toddler here either, right? I'm going to use that analogy, and thank you for painting that visual in my head. But yeah, no, the guardrails are a great construct. That's how typically we explain these to to customers or to interested prospects as they have those conversations with us, right? So there's actually two parts to this problem. The first is, how do I enable my organization to adopt agentic AI in a standard way, which, security is part of it, but it's not the main thing. It's about, okay, now I'm going to introduce another, anagram, PKI, sorry, not PKI, MCP, Model Context Protocol, right? So that's another acronym out there where the idea is, there are standards or emerging standards. MCP is probably the closest in terms of how do I enable agent to API communication, right? So there's a lot of organizations that say, we want to enable our applications for MCP-based access so that we can expose these to an AI agent on the other end. That's purely enablement. And even there is a challenge in that, okay, how do I deploy an MCP server? Where do I get an MCP server? If you think about the top maybe 15, 20, or 25, business applications in an organization, whether it's like Salesforce, as I mentioned, Microsoft Office, Slack, etc. Some of these have now started to expose MCP interfaces. So Atlassian, if you're using Jira or Confluence, is a great example. They've got an MCP interface to their product, but many of these are still in beta. And those are well-known, commonly deployed applications. If you go back to that employee productivity scenario that I talked about earlier, there's also hundreds of enterprise-only applications which an organization is, spinning up for its customers. Right? How do I enable these all for agentic access in a uniform, consistent, standards-based way? So enabling an application for MCP is one thing, and you'll see many vendors put their hands up and say, yep, we can stand up an MCP server. And one of the things that we've heard from our CIOs, from our CISO partners as we talk to these large organizations is, they want to have one specific template by which they enable these applications. They don't want to have, multiple teams doing things in different ways. But beyond that, as you go into core security, right, here are some of the main problems that come in. MCP was designed as a protocol that was developer friendly. It's about getting you access to those tools in the agentic AI world. It's not APIs anymore, it's tools, right? How do I expose as many tools as possible, and how do I get these adopted by my agent? So it was introduced as a developer friendly construct. What it doesn't do so well is authentication. How do I know this is Claude acting on behalf of user Rob and not user Brian? Right? And more importantly, even once I've identified that, how do I know that Rob, the human, can do all of these things in Slack, but Rob, the agent, or the agent acting on behalf of Rob, can only do a subset of that? So that's authentication, there's authorization, there's scope. And then you've got the notion of rogue agents, or agents going rogue because they've misinterpreted your instructions and now they're doing things that neither you nor they intended to do, right? So that's where you bring in the concept of throttling, rate limiting, and things to that effect. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, you are interacting with your crown jewels. Behind it all are your applications, where it's either data, to the point that was expressed in the previous segment, or it's actual workflows that you want to enable. Right? How do you basically go in and say, I want to protect data from leaving the organization, or I want to enable data for certain interactions, but not for others? So that's where, in all honesty, I don't think any vendor has cracked this nut. What everybody is kind of running into is, okay, we have these problems, which because of the agentic nature of these interactions, the agentic AI-driven nature of these, it's a lot harder to distinguish between, yep, that's legitimate, versus no, that isn't, right? And where we see most organizations starting with is basic visibility. I want to know who's doing what, which applications, what's the actual intent behind these things, right? I can identify, I can potentially surmise on behalf of a human user. But if it is an AI agent, right, what's the agent actually trying to do? What was the human prompt to that agent that initiated all of these things? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, super interesting. And as you're talking, I've got like the hamster in the wheel is going like faster than he's ever gone, right? And so one of the things that was coming to mind as you were talking is we talk about the new wave of where we're currently at with MCP servers, which are replacing APIs out there. But there's also the distributed workload underneath, right? And way back in the day, and I think we can all rewind the tape like a couple years here and say, back in the day, I had my server in my rack in my closet, and that's where my business was. I could point at it and I could touch it, and it maybe needed to like talk to something over here, something over there, but my stuff was here. And now everything is hyper distributed, and it's all it's modular, right? And so if you look like at a modern application, you may have your data way over there. You may have your control plane over there, and then there's pieces of your application that are actually SaaS, like software as a service, from another vendor, and then it needs to pull in data from another vendor. And so we've created this hyper distributed workload architecture underneath the large language models, the LLMs that are making decisions based on what they see in the applications they're working with. Then you've got the MCP servers that are taking action in these agentic capabilities. So you've got this like AI stuff on top, but we also have this hyper distributed. It, to me, like in my brain, and the hamster that's like begging for dear life right now, is we've created these crazy webs of like, obviously we've had the World Wide Web forever, but we're creating more and more webs, even within the workload itself, that requires things to talk to other things. Is this trend going to continue? Do we expect to create more webs? I'm turning into Spider-Man. Or like, is there going to be some point of consolidation and simplification of the things that we're building and the things that we're doing?
Really good question, Brian. Honest to goodness answer, I don't know. But if I were a betting man, which I'm not, but if I were a betting man, I would say things are going to get a lot more chaotic before people are going to realize, okay, this is the full extent of the problem that I'm now exposing myself to, right? In all honesty, your paradigm was great, right? It's all about all these different things that sit in different parts of the universe, right? Within my organization, outside my organization, third parties, etc. They all need to talk to each other for a specific amount of time. Zero trust or ZTN, that has been a concept for a while. So those problems have existed, right? But What has changed is that, earlier the whole notion was one of, okay, you've got these things within your network. They're devices, they're human beings, right? And they're services, and they follow a set pattern. It was kind of sort of predictable because at the end of the day, there was code that was determining how these things behaved, whether it was our human DNA or whether it's a service kind of behaving on behalf of some application, if you would. So you could kind of start to distill it down to, okay, that's a normal path, right? And so you could start to establish baseline. This is something that Cequence does very well. We've got lots of machine learning built in, where one of the first things we go into a customer environment with is, let's understand how your APIs are being used, right? Leaving AI aside for a side, let's just understand how your APIs are being used. And every organization has its own DNA. They're all different from different their peers, whether within or outside the industry. And if you think about where that organization is in its evolution, the way it behaves today, think of it as a living, breathing thing. It's going to be very different from how it behaves in 6 years.
Right. So Hari, like we've gone from manually building the World Wide Web, and someone made a comment about the information superhighway. I love that because we're at a point, this information superhighway is building itself, right? That's the difference, is that it used to be, as a developer, I build a road from my house to Rob's house. It's going to take a while. Yep. We'll get there. Right. But now we're saying, I'm in San Diego, Rob's in the UK. It's going to take a while, but we'll get there. But now we have these things that are like these bridges and highways and things that are creating themselves. And the thing that is transporting down the highway is, we don't know what it is. Is it a person? Is it a machine? Is it a machine that looks like a person? Is it a machine acting on behalf of a machine? Well, like, are we there yet? Are machines acting on behalf of other machines? Are agents creating other, like it seems like the sprawl is about to explode, and it's on the process of this like hockey stick situation. How do we stay on top of this?
Yeah, and it's not deterministic, to your point, right? How I go from San Diego to London today might be very different from how I do it, say, 3 days from now, 3 minutes from now, depending on the parameters that are in play, right? So again, short answer to your question, we don't know, right? What we can do is give organizations the tools to understand, okay, how are these things behaving today? We haven't established a baseline yet. And in the AI world, it's going to be very hard to establish baseline because it's, you give the same prompt to an AI agent 5 times in a row, chances are it might do 5 different things, right? And 10 different things within those 5 different things. So how do you basically get to a point where you understand something is benign versus something is potentially anomaly, potentially going rogue, or help, bring that thing, going back to your toddler analogy. Yep, he figured out a way to open the door. He's running out, right? How do we bring him back in, keep him within the confines of your house and still get the joy that you want out of that whole interaction? So that's where visibility, observability, understanding what APIs are being used, how these APIs are being used. Again, in all honesty, the notion of business logic abuse, things like gift card abuse, account takeover, these have been constructs that have been here for a while. Right? What's changing is the scale at which these calls are being made. How fast and how do we tie these things together? How did that call, map to this particular call? How do you kind of build that bridge in the context of this is the interaction, this is what's going on? That's going to be super interesting. That's something that I'm personally very excited to kind of go out and help, get some clarity, get on top of. But right now it's about, okay, let's enable these things. Let's enable our applications for agentic AI access. Let's start to realize the promise of AI, whether it's the productivity, whether it's the additional revenue, etc. And then let's be very mindful about security from day one, so that if things were to go wrong, you have those, protectors for your, electric sockets, or you have those things that protect the kid from, going up the stairway, if you would.
Yeah, and this is, we're talking about the API of the actual application here as well, and how it communicates, but you've also got to think about the foundational security elements that we're putting into the workload itself. So, you spoke about, access, and so scope of access is super critical. Remember I spoke about those guardrails for toddlers?
Yep.
Well, look, one of the things that you've got to consider is there's a huge amount of complexity that's going on, and we're building architecture which is, it's cloud native architecture, it's containers, etc. There's lots of things like identity, like permissions, etc., that are going into that. And it's one of the reasons that we built Amazon Bedrock Agent Core, was to kind of help customers to have, an orchestration engine, so they can make sure they have the correct infrastructure and the correct policies that will support those workloads and those agentic workloads. And then what they need to look at is, how is it actually supposed to be behaving? And this is one of the things that I spoke to a few people around this week is you need to know how your application should be working, how the agent should be working, and understand when it isn't working as it should be. So threat modeling is something that we just don't see a lot in organizations that don't have a big security department. But part of threat modeling and scoping is knowing how the application should be running. So rather than just saying what's the agent doing, what's the application doing as a workflow as well. And so I think it's super important that you look at foundational security as well as the security of the model or the agent as well. That's something that I think we sometimes miss in the rush to kind of secure AI.
Yep, agreed. And in this context, I mean, there's the notion of UEBA, user entity behavioral analytics. So think of that as now transforming to threat entity behavior analytics, but in the context of agents, right? So that's where this is exploding as we speak, and being able to understand what is normal is going to be so critical for us to basically say, yes, I can go ahead, proceed with, enabling agentic AI, at the pace at which my business requires me to do so.
Yeah. So let's say I'm a security practitioner or a security leader. If I get a promotion within a customer, and the business is driving towards they want to start using agents. Maybe they've already played with a few agents, a few simple standalone agents. But the business value with agentic is often in the more complex, orchestrated, semi-autonomous kind of agentic flows. So, we're going to have to go there at some stage. So, what would be your advice for a security professional trying to enable the business to use agentic, but to do so in a secure and compliant way that's not going to cause them, more issues going forward?
Yeah, no, going back to your toddler analogy, crawl, walk, run, right? Start with, and this is what we're seeing with many of our early adopters on the agentic AI front. And we've got customers, whether it's like telcos, retail, financial organizations, they're all starting with, here's a couple of key applications that we want to try this out in a potentially sandboxed environment, see how that thing behaves, see if we're getting the return on investment that we're making, right? And see if it can scale beyond that. So people are starting with small teams, small sets of employees. I just want to enable Slack as an application within my organization, or I just want to enable this particular application for agentic commerce, but for this subset of inventory, right? Once you get that, you get a hang of the hang of the game, so to speak. Now you're in a position where you can expose that slowly and at a larger scale. But it hasn't changed. It is pretty much the same thing, whether it was going into the cloud, whether it was adopting Internet of Things, etc. Start with a business use case. Make sure you get, so much of security, I think, to the point that you were making earlier, is about visibility. You can only solve the problems you're aware of. Start there, make sure that you've kind of contained it, and then from there you can say, okay, these are the lessons I've learned. I'm now going to understand these and apply these to the additional applications in my organization. And to be fair, like most customers we're speaking with are in that first initial step of the journey, right? They want to realize the benefits, but they're being very cautious about it because of the threat of AI.
Yeah. So start simple, build the muscle memory, learn how your application or your agent should be working, and then build from there. That's awesome. Hari, thank you so much for coming on board with us and talking to us today. It's been super interesting. Brian, we're at reInvent. Well, you're at reInvent. I'm not at reInvent, but Security Live is at reInvent next week. So
solid plug, Rob.
Hari, are you joining us as well?
Hari, are you going to be at reInvent?
Oh, sorry. Oh, I wish I was. Sorry, I thought the question was for Brian. No, I won't be in the US in December. We've been running pretty hard for the last couple of months, so I'm going to take some time off, go to India where my parents are, spend some time with them before the rest of the Christmas holiday, so I can come back. I was at the event in Philadelphia, I think, this summer. That was joyous. I couldn't run into Brian and get all the stuff that he promised there, but maybe the next time around.
Awesome. If you guys if you're listening, and we'll have a full agenda for reInvent. So we'll be pretty much all day streaming with multiple guests. So please do join us next week. We've had an awesome time today. Thanks everybody.